If you really want to go overseas, you'll find a way, and you'll be over there this summer or next summer. One of the best programs available here to you at Augsburg is SPAN, and I'm sure some of you know about it. Some of you are directly involved in it. SPAN stands for Student Project for Amity Among Nations. It's a big mouthful. But it's a 2-year project for Minnesota College students. And the way it works, there's 4 parts to it. First, you apply and you get accepted. Then, it's not so hard. Then, the second part, you study for a year. You study about the country you're going to under the direction of a professor. You study the language, if a language is needed, and you start preparing a project that you'll do while you're there. The third part is probably the most fun. That's when you're in the country. You're there for 2 months, plus you've got some time to travel before and afterwards. You do your project, you travel around, you meet people. Then the fourth part is when you come home, you write up your project as a paper, and you go around and give speeches and solicit funds for those going the next year. The real benefits of SPAN, besides the educational benefits, are that you go on scholarship, and a great part of your way is paid by your scholarship. Another benefit is that you work very hard, but you're rewarded with college credits for your work, and these can apply toward graduation. Another project or another plan to get abroad if you're a student is JYA, or Junior Year Abroad. Some of you make it Sophomore Year Abroad. But this is where you go for a year to a school in England or wherever you choose. Before you go, you make arrangements with your administration and with the school you want to go to, so your credits will transfer, and this will lead towards your graduation. Sometimes this is even less expensive than a year of school here in the States, because the tuition costs aren't quite as high and living costs are sometimes lower. And in the long run, sometimes you can do it for what it would cost you to stay here, plus you get your transportation and some time to travel too. A third way of going abroad is student charters, and this sometimes is through your school. There are other plans. Crossroads Africa, I don't know if you know about this. This is a group that American students from throughout the United States that go to Africa every summer. And groups of 10 or 12 go to different African countries, and there they work on projects with African students, building a road, or sometimes not quite as strenuous projects. But this is one way of going over. And on this kind of plan, often you can get somebody to back you. So again, the money isn't the big problem. Probably the most common way for students to go abroad, or the one most students use, is going abroad independently. And this is where you just go on your own. You aren't sponsored by anybody but yourself and maybe a hard summer's work the year before. To go to Europe, probably the cheapest way is to fly Icelandic Airlines from New York to Luxembourg. The days of being a waitress or busboy on the ship is over. Don't get dreams like this, because it just isn't possible anymore. But for a fairly reasonable price, you can fly to Luxembourg. Once you get in Europe, travel is very easy. They have a good train system, and if you buy a Eurail pass here in the United States before you go, you can have unlimited train travel in about 13 European countries for 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, depending on the pass you buy here in the United States before you go. When in Europe, besides traveling on train, you could, if you're energetic and athletic, like some of the girls I saw here before convocation, you can get bicycles. And the distances aren't as great in Europe as they are here in the United States, and you'll meet lots of other students pedaling along. And it's a good way to see the country, and certainly your transportation cost isn't too high. Energy, very high, but transportation costs not so much. When you're in Europe, Student hostels are the places where most students stay, primarily because of convenience and, again, because of cost. And here, for as low as 25 cents a night, if you bring your own sleeping bag, you can have a place to sleep and sometimes a stove or kitchen facilities to use to make your supper or your breakfast. There's a catch sometimes to this because the price is low, you have to pitch in, and maybe your chore will be to sweep the floor before you go off the next morning to do your sightseeing or your touring or whatever you plan. But it is a good way of going through Europe, and also you meet students from all the other European and, well, all the countries of the world staying in the hostels. You may wonder, well, if I get to Europe and I'm bicycling through or going through, well, what am I going to do for food? Is that going to be a real expense? Well, it's not. There are many inexpensive places where you can eat. Now, McDonald's hasn't hit Europe yet, but still, you can get a good plate of spaghetti for the same price as a McDonald's hamburger. Maybe you won't get much sauce, but at least you get enough to get through to the next day. Another way that students kind of overcome the problem of eating is that they go out and get a loaf of that French bread that you read about and some cheese, and they picnic. Well, this is fine if you don't have to do it every day. You don't want to be so limited that you're on bread and cheese for 3 months. But still, this is one way of saving your pennies from time to time while you're there. To defray expenses, many students plan to work while they're in Europe. And this is fine, and it can be done. But you have to do it here, make the arrangements here before you go abroad. But it is not too hard to do. I know one fellow that worked on a German farm. Well, he traveled over. He had some time before he started work. He lived with a German family. He perfected his German, and he had some time to travel on the way back. I know another girl who was a governess in Switzerland. Well, during the week, she took care of the kiddies and took them to the beach and took them around, and she saw quite a bit of life in Switzerland, taking care of these children. Plus, she had her weekends off and the time to travel before and afterwards. This, again, cut down her expenses, and she had look at family life from the inside out. As a sideline, she found out that they ate an awful lot of potatoes and they didn't have very much meat. But she got by that too. Other working possibilities can be arranged, but again, I say do this before you go. Some students plan to go over and go to work camps. Here, you have, for a nominal fee, you have your room and board, and you work with French students or German students on projects there. And it gives a good time for exchange, plus you have time for travel too. Some of these projects are like painting schoolrooms or things like this. In Israel, if you're interested in going there, you could stay at a kibbutz. And here, you get free room and board. This is if you stay for 6 weeks, I think is the minimum time you have to stay. 6 weeks or 2 months. And then you work 8 hours a day at the kibbutz. You get this experience. Some of the jobs in a kibbutz, you might be an apple picker, or you might be a chicken plucker, or you might be an ironer. But this is one way of having the experience of being in a kibbutz plus the travel. And you have some time to travel in Israel plus the traveling to and from Israel. Another possibility is being a short-term missionary, going over and being a missionary for the summer. There are many ways of doing this, and this is a good way to get to Asia or Africa or to South America. Often you can get a church to sponsor you or someone to be behind you a little bit financially, because this is the big problem with students. And you can go to a mission station, perhaps help with a summer play program, perhaps help build an airstrip. There are all kinds of projects that are needed. My husband and I did this one summer, and we went to a small mission station near the Sudan. And we flew out, and then we took a boat trip for 5 hours down the river, and we finally got to the mission station. And it was just a wonderful experience. It was very warm there. Everybody wore shorts and went barefoot, including the missionaries. You know, they weren't the pith helmet type. And we had a very wonderful experience teaching and helping them put in some of their crops. It was an experience for us because we never farmed, but we had a chance to see this, plus live with the Anuak people and see how missionaries in this part of the world work. These are just a few ways when you're in school for going abroad. What happens when you get that old degree in your hand? Well, one of the best ways is to be a Fulbright scholar. There you have your expenses paid, you have lots of time to travel, and you get to study too. If you aren't so lucky, there are other ways after you graduate to see the world. One, Uncle Sam has a good program, and I think probably many of you are familiar with it. And whether you go voluntarily or involuntary to one of the many U.S. bases, take advantage of being abroad, of being able to be in a foreign culture, and get out. Many Americans don't. They stay right on their base, and they don't see what's around them, and they're missing a marvelous opportunity. Uncle Sam has some other programs besides the military. The Peace Corps is one. I'm very pro the Peace Corps. I don't know, I think maybe there's been a change in it since I was a member, but Peace Corps is for 2 years. And you think when you graduate, 2 years, that's an eternity. But it really isn't, and it goes very fast. And with the Peace Corps, you can often pick the area that you're interested to go to. Africa was my choice, but you might be interested in South America or India or wherever you wish to go. You have some choice in where you're going. Then you can go, and often you have specific jobs, but that's something I'm sure it's easy for you to check into. Another program after you graduate is the Foreign Service, and this requires taking the Foreign Service exam and passing it, then training with the government, and then you go abroad and you represent the government in the various embassies and consulates and things like this. And this is a good way if you want to spend your life traveling. It's one vocation that you can certainly do this. And also after you graduate, you can go independently. And this is what I did in '64 after I came back from 2 years in the Peace Corps. I still wasn't ready to settle down to the American way of life. And the Olympics were coming up in Japan very shortly, and I thought, how can I get there? Well, I had enough to pay my passage over, but I didn't have enough to live while I was there. But I was able to find a job teaching English to Japanese people 4 hours a day. Wow. And with teaching just 4 hours a day, I had enough money to live 24 hours. So I went over, saw the Olympics, earned enough money to pay for my room and board while I was there, traveling in Europe, and a few pearls. They weren't the choice ones, but I had a good experience doing this. I didn't come out with a lot of money when I left Japan, but I certainly paid my way while I